Please be seated. Veuillez vous asseoir.
Good morning again. Just to let you know that we are trying hard to find a solution for next week. And we will hopefully...
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Maître Altid, thank you, Mr. President.
We have a little bit more than 1 hour because I have to leave a little bit earlier. Thank you. And then we resume at 3 for 2 hours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Maître Altid, thank you, Mr. President. Question. Mr. Witness, what did you know in your capacity as the officer in charge of the gendarmerie and secos on the number of ex-rebel soldiers present at the Gulf Hotel? Did you have such information? And what did you know about their weaponry?
Pendant les événements,
Answer. During the events, I did not have much information. During the events, I did not have much information as to the strength or number of soldiers at the Gulf. However, shortly before the march of the 16th of December, there was a TV report on the TV which was known at the time as the TCI. During that program, we all saw that a number of soldiers had assembled and were receiving instructions from their leader in relation to the installation of the Director General of the TV at the RTI. It is through those images that we were able to know that there were soldiers at the Gulf, 2, that they were armed, and going by the images and the number of persons assembled, I think there were a number of them. There were many people there. Question. Thank you. The leader you just referred to a short while ago, who was he? Their leader. Answer. The one who was giving instructions on that day to the soldiers was Commander Watao.
D'accord.
Question. Very well.
Parce que là, il s'agit...
Then, subsequently, what you're telling us about happened in mid-December 2010. Did you subsequently obtain any additional information as to who was present at the Gulf Hotel throughout the crisis? Answer. It was known that there were soldiers or detachments of the FRCI, but we had no idea of their strength or the number of troops.
D'accord. Aviez...
Question. And very well. Did you have an idea about the identity of the former rebel military leaders, that is the military leaders of the FAFN who were at the Gulf? Answer. What I am certain of is that Commander Watao was there. Commander Muru was also there. that is it. As for the others, I am not able to provide you with any names other than those two about which I am certain. Very well.
Et Alassane Ouattara,
Alassane Ouattara, was he at the Hotel du Golf? Answer. Can you please repeat your question? Question. Alassane Ouattara, was he at the Hotel du Golf? Answer. I would think so. I didn't go there, but I think he was there. Question. Very well. As far as you know, did he have any French military advisors at that time? Answer. I am not aware of that. Question. Very well. Did you learn that political, military, and diplomatic officials of French nationality were present at the hotel? Answer. I don't know about that either. Question. Very well. Were there any gendarmerie observation posts within the proximity of the Gulf Hotel? Answer. There was a police observation post within the proximity of the Gulf Hotel. Question. Very well. Only one post? Answer. Initially, one post close to the Gulf Hotel. As one came from Cocody towards the Gulf Hotel, not far away from the residence of Madame Prt2 Gbagbo. Question. As far as you know, was that observation post attacked? Answer. Yes. Question. Who attacked it? Answer. The General Director of the Police reported to us at a meeting one day that his troops detached to that observation post had come under attack from a military detachment that had come from the Gulf. They were attacked, their weapons were taken away, and 2 or 3 persons were taken hostage, and all what they collected was taken back to the Gulf Hotel. This reported was made at the meeting of the generals. The Chief of General Staff said that he contacted the soldiers at the Gulf requesting that one or all the police officers who had been taken hostage be released and that the weapons be returned. Shortly thereafter, the policeman or policemen were released, but the weapons collected were never returned. Question. Very well. This attack that you are talking about, did it take place before, during, or after the elections?
C'était
Answer. I think it was shortly after the elections when things became a little tense, but I cannot be specific as to the date. Question. Very well. Is the Hotel du Golf located close to the residence of the President of the Republic or the presidential residence at the time? Answer. No, there is quite some distance between the two. As the crow flies, it would be between 1.5 to 2 kilometers.
pendant la période dont nous parlons,
Question. During that period which we're talking about, was there a risk that the presidential residence could have been attacked from the Gulf Hotel?
Pour les planificateurs,
Answer. For the planners, that was one of the hypotheses. For anyone who had a good plan, that was part of the hypothesis. And the residence of the head of state was, may I say, a very sensitive point. Question. Very well. Yesterday, we talked about, or rather you talked about with the prosecutor at length or you talked about the march of the 16th of December, that incident. The soldiers, ex-rebels, who were at the Hotel du Golf, did they, as far as you know, launch an attack on the 16th of December? Answer. Let me say that following the attack on the police observation post, the Chief of General Staff of the Armies decided to replace the soldiers, the policemen by soldiers. And the soldiers were then posted to the Madame Houphouët-Boigny Carrefour, or roundabout. You see, we had all seen the pictures on TV and the instructions that were given to a detachment of soldiers with a view to coming to install the Director General of the RTI. One of the strategies envisioned by the Chief of General Staff was that those who were planning to come and install the General Director were necessarily going to pass by that roundabout or that Carrefour, and therefore there was need for that area to be reinforced. On the day of the march, I was in Cocody, and the Chief of General Staff gave instructions for SECOS to make available detachments of soldiers and gendarmes and SECOS elements, and I think I heard some gunfire, intense gunfire at that time, sustained gunfire at that location, because from the gendarmerie school one could distinctly hear the gunfire from that location in the morning. When our men returned, they reported back to us, and the Chief of General Staff that very evening at our debriefing session confirmed that there had been sustained gunfire between those who wanted to force their way through and those who were assigned to stop them from passing through. On that day, 2 soldiers were killed, or 2 or 3 were killed at that location, but at the very least 2 were killed at that location. Now, as for the casualties on the other side, I do not know.
Go.
Question. Very well. So what you're telling us is that on the 16th of December, there was an attack from the Gulf Hotel on that observation point, that former police observation point, which was now occupied by soldiers, and that it ended up with at least 2 soldiers being killed. Is that correct? Answer. Yes, that is correct. Question. Very well. Now, for things to be extremely clear, a short while ago you explained to us how the events unfolded, and you talked about instructions being given on TV, instructions being given by the rebels' military leader to the effect that they should go and install. Were you saying that these instructions were given by a military official at the Gulf, an official of the ex-rebels, to go and install the general director at the TV? Is that correct? Answer: yes, that is what the officer indicated clearly. Question: do you know whether the Prime Minister's office was one of the targets of those who were demonstrating on that day, on the 16th of December? Answer: that is what was being said, but I have no confirmation of that. Question: on several occasions yesterday, you explained to the court that it was the DGPN, the General Director of the National Police, who was in charge of law enforcement operations on the 16th of December 2010. My question to you is the following. Was this normal that the police would be in charge of law enforcement during demonstrations? Answer: that was the absolute rule. Question: very well. You explained to the court that there were armed men among the marchers. You mentioned the weapons that they were bearing. You also illustrated to the court a number of incidents that had taken place on that day. And then you went on to talk about an armed march. Now, what I would like to know, and I just want us to save time by not delving into every detail that you mentioned. What I want to know from you specifically is whether those armed persons who were part of the march, were they acting as an organized commando? Answer: I do not know whether they were organized. What I know is that most of the soldiers of the FDS died on that day as a result of their activities, that is, the activities of the armed persons. Question: very well. You told us, and I'm referring here to page 50 of yesterday's transcript, 29th March, French transcript. You indicated that at the main locations where the march took place, there were always armed persons among the marchers, particularly in Abobo. And I want to quote what you said. At line 2, question, and I quote, very well. Where were there armed persons? Line 4, answer. Your answer, I quote, at all major locations where the marching was taking place, there were always armed persons when the crowds were marching. That's what you said. That's what he said. There were always armed persons in the crowds of marchers. That is what he said, particularly in Abobo. End of quote. Were you saying in that testimony that on all the roads on which the march was taking place and throughout the itinerary there were armed persons? Answer: what I mainly wanted to say was that I was referring to the report from the Director General of the Police to our debrief. In fact, he said that indeed at various locations in Abidjan, his men had either been killed by gunshots or injured by gunshots, and that generally speaking, those who fired the shots were hidden within the crowd of marchers. And that is me telling the story of what he told us at the did. The gendarmes and the policemen become aware that it was an armed march. Answer. When the first gunshots went off at different locations during the march in Abidjan, and those gunshots were targeting the FDS, given that the march had been prohibited, it wasn't authorized, it is at that time that the DGPN said that he began to receive reports that most of the marchers were armed, if not all. Not all of them, but many of them were armed. Question. Very well. Was that in the morning? Answer. He wasn't specific, and he didn't provide a date as to the specific incidents. His report covered the entire day. Question. Very well. You told us yesterday at page 30 of the French transcript the following, and I quote, "In the morning, the radios were announcing that shots had been heard coming from the marchers." End of quote. Were you saying that information on the various radios, police, gendarme, army, SECOs, were providing that information? Answer, yes. Yes, the reports were coming in real time from the various detachment leaders on the ground. Therefore, all those who were listening to the various radio networks were able to become aware or to know that indeed some of the marchers were indeed armed and were actually shooting at some of the men of the FDS. Question, very well.
I just want to make sure I'm getting the references right as we go through. Could we have that reference again, just to that earlier testimony?
Ne vous excusez pas, c'est tout à fait normal.
No need to apologize. I was referring to page 32 of the French transcripts yesterday.
3.
2 and 3.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Maître Altid, thank you, Mr. President.
Français.
Yesterday, at page 23 of the French transcript, you said that during the operations of 16 December, the operations we're talking about, the DGPN, the General Director of the National Police, indicated to the Chief of General Staff that some of the arrangements had been breached, and that it is for that reason that you were being asked, and you told us that you sent about 12 men to the Carrefour de la Vie. I'm going to quote. Let me quote. The Director General of the National Police informed the Chief of General Staff that part of his setup had been breached at the Carrefour at the Akban barracks, and this was by those who were marching towards the RTI through the Boulevard des Martyrs. Now, that number of 12 troops whom you mentioned yesterday, and at page 25, 26 of the French transcripts, you went on to say that they were armed with shields and batons and a few kalash by way of precaution. And I quote what you said, because there was already on the radio networks information about policemen having been killed from the beginning of the march. Policemen had already been killed, therefore it was an armed march. Now my question is the following. If I understood you very well, the kalashes that you mentioned were not available to everybody.
In the situation of embargo in which we found ourselves, there was obvious concern about weapons. We did not have kalashes for everyone. That is true. In all the units of the FDS, including the gendarmerie, the police, or the three armies, the situation was the same. Question, very well. More specifically, for that small group of about a dozen men, how many kalashes were there? Answer. Maybe the detachment took about 2 or 3. I do not know. One thing is certain is that we could not have one for every individual. It was not possible. Question, very well. Page 26 of the French transcript of yesterday, you indicated that lethal weapons which could kill could only be used in case of legitimate self-defense. Can you briefly tell us logically about the rules of engagement in the maintenance of law and order, and then the rules of engagement when it comes to legitimate self-defense? Can you do that for us very briefly? Answer. Let me recall that the law and order enforcement operations are governed by the instruments that were presented to us yesterday by Counsel for the Prosecution, 1967. And in accordance to those instruments, the use of force and weapons for law enforcement should be done in accordance with specific provisions, with specific requisitions for the use of force and special requisitions for the use of weapons. So those are the provisions for the rules of engagement for law and order maintenance. But generally speaking, there are possibilities for the legitimate self-defense, either of yourself or your colleagues. Since the first civilian authority could be in the field, and you understand why. So we have that other possibility, legitimate self-defense, and that is why we insisted on that second hypothesis. When people had to be placed at the disposal of the police, we had to recall those provisions to the police. So there had to be some kalashes as a precaution. So if marchers had to be pushed back, we simply asked our men to be vigilant. If gunshots were fired, those who had kalashes had to automatically respond by returning fire. Unfortunately for us, it was difficult, and that is why there was a lot of harm caused, because those who were firing, after firing, they would hide in the crowd. Question, very well. Just to be clear, you have told us that you reminded all the SECOS units to be involved in the operations led by the police, that legal weapons could only be used in cases of legitimate self-defense. Is that correct? Answer, yes.
Clear also before.
Alors,
question. You have told us about 2 vehicles of the group Dje, which were equipped with machine guns. And you told us that it was because those vehicles were to cover the highways and prevent criminals from operating on the highways. Is that correct? Answer, yes. Question, but you told us that the machine guns mounted on those vehicles were frequently broken down. My question to you is, were these machine guns in a state of disrepair on the 16th of December? Answer, on the 16th of December, those weapons were not firing. Question, why? Answer, on the 16th of December, those weapons were not operational. And in any case, if you are not certain about the reliability of a weapon, if you shoot once or twice and it stops, or it freezes, or it jams, it is better not to take such a weapon to the field. Question, very well. You told us, page 34 of the French transcript, you told us that when the General Directorate of the National Police deploys your men, it is under the authority of their commissioners, and I quote you, line 23, because one should not forget that the DGPN, when they deploy our men, they deploy them under the authority of its commissioners, end of quote. Let us understand each other well. Does that mean that in an operation such as the one of the 16th of December, organized and conducted by the police, the SECOS units that intervene are under the direct authority of police authorities, for example, commissioners? Let me rephrase the question. Answer, yes. Not only under the authority, but under what we refer to as the operational control of the police commissioners at the location of the SECOS does not have operational autonomy as a SECOS unit. Is that correct? Answer, that is not exactly it. When it comes to operations of all sorts, whether it is law enforcement or military operations, there is a chain of operational command. Once that operational chain of command has been established, the commander of that chain makes his needs known in terms of what we refer to as capacity. We can talk about needs in men or capacity. Now, within the framework of the operation of the 16th of December, the operational chain established was under the DGPN. So they expressed their needs to all the major commands. But once we are within the framework of the singularity of command or a unified command, the point is when you place your units under the operational command of a different authority, you can no longer issue operational instructions. Your role is limited to logistical support. You can provide weapons, ammunition, and take care of them if they are injured. You can provide vehicles, fuel, and so on. But you can no longer give operational instructions, and sometimes you do not even necessarily know the positions at which those units are deployed. Question, very well.
À propos des élèves de l'école.
Now, regarding the students of the gendarmerie school who had been sent to Carrefour Texaco, page 42 of the French transcript, you said that they were equipped with some weapons. You talked about shields and batons. You even said that because of the shortages, there were no more than 5 weapons. As far as you can remember, can you tell us which weapons and how many of them were there in the possession of these people who were at the Texaco roundabout on the 16th of December? Answer: it was a small detachment, so I'm not the one who personally manages such small detachments, but what you need to know is that at the gendarmerie school we do not have an intervention unit. So weapons, equipment in weapons is not a priority. You have the gendarmerie squadrons that have weapons as a priority, but we had semi-automatic French weapons dating from 1956, and then you had some old Mass 36 weapons from the Second World War. These are the types of weapons that we had at the school, and these were mainly used for the training of the students and for shooting practice. Question, very well. And just to have an idea about how many of those old weapons did you have that were used for shooting practice? Answer: probably less than were in a good state of functioning. Answer: I cannot tell you, but out of the 80 or so weapons, a good number of them were defective, and since these were old weapons, it was not easy to maintain them. Question. Now, coming back to the men, the small group that you were talking about, those who were sent to the Carrefour Texaco. Do you remember how many operational weapons they actually had, approximately? I believe you said that they did not have more than 5 weapons. When you said 5 weapons, were you referring to rifles or other types of weapons? Answer: the 2 types of guns or rifles that I was talking about a short while ago.
D'accord.
Very well. Now, if I understand you correctly, out of the approximately 20 men that were sent to the Texaco Carrefour, about 5 of them had weapons. Is that correct? Answer, yes. Question, very well. Did those 5 weapons have ammunition in them? Answer, yes. Question, now I will read your statement to you. 0051-0335, page 0362. And I will wait for my friends to be ready.
Alors, je vais citer à la ligne 959.
I will quote line 957. Mr. President, can Council wait for the page to be displayed?
Wait for the page coming up on the
Bien
screen.
entendu.
Thank you.
Alors,
Question. Now, I will quote from page 959. Person interviewed, and that is you. But there was no ammunition because it was not the 7.62. There was no ammunition. Interviewer 3, I beg your pardon. Person interviewed, there was no ammunition because those rifles were no longer in service. There was no ammunition. It is just that they had to be used if they were attacked. They would use them as a means of defense if they were attacked. Interviewer number 3, but explain that to me. You give, well, because I'm trying to understand the logic. Person interviewed. Interviewer 3. The logic. Person interviewed. Interviewer 3. You take students from the second year. Person interviewed. Interviewer number 3. You give them arms. Person interviewed. Interviewer 3, these weapons are functioning, but they do not have ammunition. And you are saying that they have to use them to defend themselves. Person interviewed, to defend themselves as elements, as you know, it is the weapon itself. If somebody is attacked, they can use it to push them back, but not shoot. Interviewer 3, very well. Person interviewed, not to shoot. Do not forget that we are in a situation of law and order. End of quote. Now, based on what you said to the investigator of the OTP, you seem to have said that, in fact, those 5 weapons in the possession of that small group did not have ammunition. And you were saying that those weapons had to be used sort of like blunt weapons. Is that what you meant, or is there something you need to correct? Answer. Generally speaking, for the Kalashnikovs, we had the barrels, but for the Kalash, but these weapons, which were older, had a more serious problem. So finding ammunition for them was even far more difficult. I believe that is what was on my mind. So the detachment commander may have had a little bit of ammunition, some of the ammunition that had been reserved for shooting practice. It is true that there was no match there. It was out of precaution that they were positioned there. But I think they did in fact have a small amount of ammunition.
Quand vous dites un petit volant de munitions, c'est à peu près quoi par fusil, combien?
When you say a small amount, how many bullets per rifle? Answer, I really do not know, but small quantities are given to people, 4, 5 bullets per person. Answer, very well. If I understand you correctly, the Kalashnikovs were reserved to the units who ran a risk of being attacked on that day. Answer, no. I said that since we had difficulties procuring weapons, the command established priorities. The 2 gendarmerie schools were not a priority when it came to procurement of weapons. But we had a little equipment, but which was reserved for the defense of our own barracks. Question, very well, that is clear.
Alors, pour en revenir...
Question. Now, coming back to what we were talking about a short while ago, the positions that were breached. Which positions were breached and how did this happen? Answer, based on what I was told, normally the marchers who were coming either from Williamsville or from Ajame would normally have been stopped at the level of the Akban barracks, but this did not happen. And they took the direction of Carrefour Saint-Jacques in order to branch off on the Boulevard des Martyrs. So it was at that level that the DGPN realized that there was a problem, and they referred the matter to the general staff, and positions had to be set up between the Carrefour Saint-Jacques and the other location, Boulevard des Martyrs. Question, very well. And how were these positions breached in military terms? Answer, the soldiers, or rather the gendarmes, who were responsible for ensuring that the marchers should be stopped there, maybe did not arrive their positions on time. So they arrived when the marchers were already passing by or had passed by. They could no longer intervene. Or maybe they were not there at all. That is just a hypothesis that I'm putting forward.
D'accord.
Question, very well. And now, to come back to the gunfire itself during the march. You are a professional. Now, the roads on which the marchers were marching and the methods which they used with the police, does that reveal an operation of a military nature? You have people who come out and shoot at the forces, or people come out, they shoot, and then they dive back amongst the population. So I cannot say that they were organized and they were using conventional tactical strategies. That's not what I said. On page 47 of yesterday's French transcript, you said, and I quote, I believe it was line 19, line 19. He also talked about the civilians who were killed, and he mentioned that when it came to the civilians killed, we had to be very careful because the people considered as civilians were generally armed persons. There was no distinctive sign, but these were armed. Is this in the report of the authorities? For example, the report that was shown to you by the prosecution counsel, when it is indicated civilian losses, this could very well mean armed individuals, according to what you said. Is that correct?
I think perhaps maybe more specific, because I think referring to a report of the authorities that is shown to the witness without perhaps showing the report again, I'm not clear what my friend is referring to. And I think in any event, the extended question calls for some sort of speculation on the part of the witness. I'm not quite clear what the point is.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Altit, Mr. President, well, I agree to quote one or two examples of the reports that were shown to the witness. Even though I'm trying to save time.
That my friend is calling for some kind of speculative gloss on the words in the reports, and I must admit there were objections when I asked for such things.
Let's look at the report and be then more specific.
Alors, oui.
Mr. Altit, to answer my learned friend's concern, I'll be more specific. I will call up a document, and that is CIV OTP 0045-1157, and then I'll ask the witness to comment.
It actually wasn't shown to the witness, I don't think, during my questioning, unless I've forgotten, but I don't recall showing it.
C'est un autre exercice. J'essaie de...
Mr. Altit, it is a different exercise. I am reacting to the observation of my learned friend by proposing something slightly different to the witness so that it should be clearer.
Alors, est-ce qu'on, monsieur, vous voyez le document qui se trouve?
Can you see the document in front of you, Mr. Witness? Can you see it? Answer, yes. Question, very well. Can we go to the page 1163?
Vous voyez?
Can you see it? Answer, yes. Question. Under the column, civilians, victims of the march of the RHDP of the 16th and 17th of December 2010, there are 6 names, 6 individuals identified, and then 5 unidentified individuals. Is that correct? Answer, yes. Question. Based on what you heard about the way the incidents took place, now these civilians, could they also have been armed assailants?
I will object to that. I just do not know what this question... There has to be some sort of foundation for asking the witness to look at a document. It hasn't been asked if he's seen it before, hasn't been asked if he knows about the allegations, to then interpret it or comment or make some... There isn't a basis for proceeding with any question on this document, and in any event, to then ask for some kind of opinion about whether or not this could mean the other. It's highly speculative, Your Honours. I do object, in fact, to this question, I must say. And I have shown some latitude. I mean, I have been quite relaxed about it.
Okay.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Alti, thank you, Mr. President. The question is not to invite him to talk about the civilians in particular, quite naturally. The issue here is to bring him to understand, to bring us to understand the situation and to understand what he has told us and what he told us in previous days based on his knowledge of the events. That's simply asking whether the civilians mentioned there could also have been attackers. We just want to understand that, Mr. President.
Do you know if those people were, not could they have been? I mean, that's speculative.
Si vous permettez juste une petite précision.
Mr. President, now it's in relation to the word civilian. We want to clarify that once and for all. The witness is here. He's able to give us the true meaning of the word civilian. In French, when we say civilian, we mean unarmed persons. Now, the question here is to find out whether these persons could have been armed.
To me, in this context, civilians are all those which are not the FDS. Right?
Oui, bien sûr, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, Mr. President, you said so, and it was clear. But the question here is a bit different. The question is to one of the authorities of the FDS. The use of the word civilians in an FDS report. What did that word civilian mean in an FDS report, whether it be SECOS or the Gendarmerie or any other branch of the FDS? We want to clarify that once and for all.
What does the word civilian mean in a report?
Très bien, Monsieur le Président. Oui, oui.
Very well, Mr. President. I agree with you. Now, Mr. Witness, you have heard the discussion. Now, we want you to clarify, for the benefit of the court, what the word civilian means in the FDS, SECOS, Gendarmerie reports. Does civilian mean unarmed, or does it refer to all non-military persons? Or does it cover those who may have been...
Civilian mean in the military report of SECOS or of the police or of the gendarmerie?
Perhaps
Now,
also-
this is the question. No, please. What does the word civilian refer to when it's written in a report of the police, of the SECOS, of the gendarmerie, etc.?
Le premier sens de ce terme, c'est
The first meaning of that word civilian is someone who does not belong to any of the units of the FDS. That's the first meaning. Now, in the context in which we were, wherein several attacks came from persons in civilian attire, not carrying any distinctive insignia that might indicate that they belonged to any component of a security and defense force, and who had weapons and used such weapons against the FDS, and then would subsequently hide among civilian population. That was something that was extremely difficult for us. So in the document before me here, the penultimate column refers to two unidentified individuals from Dukwe of unknown nationality. And you see here, they were shot by the fancy following a refusal to obey. Now, generally, these types of signs provoke the forces. You see someone in civilian, he is asked to stop, and he does not comply. And in the context in which we were, the forces can think that this person or these persons are armed, and that's why they react accordingly. So if one is being controlled or checked in the context of December 2010, and such a thing happens, and somebody does not comply, then one can assume that that individual is an armed civilian. This is the kind of explanation I can provide.
On the basis of your knowledge, and looking at this document, say if one or more of those people are civilians in one sense or in the other sense, as you just explained.
il m'est difficile, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, it is difficult for me to do so, except I refer to the remarks that I have already made. From the other indications, I am not able to determine whether those persons were probably bearing weapons while appearing in civilian attire.
Maître Altit.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Maître Altit, thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I know that you warned us that
D'accord.
Thank you.
Maître Altit, very well. Now, Mr. Witness, were you informed that the prosecutor of the ICC made a statement on the day of the march, that is on the 16th of December 2010? The witness, I no longer remember, counsel. Question, very well. how can you, as a professional and someone in charge of the various units we talked about, how do you describe the security atmosphere in Abidjan after the march of the 16th of December? Deleterious. Deleterious in a very deleterious environment.
Pouvez-vous expliquer un peu plus pourquoi délétère? Qu'est-ce qui se...
Why would you say it was deleterious, and what was happening at that time?
Les tensions existaient encore.
Answer, well, because the tension was still ongoing, tension between the various groups, and the target continued to be the FDS in Abobo, that is the target of the Commando Invisible. Now, you showed me a document a short while ago. Up until the 21st of December 2010, there were still incidents where people did not obey when the forces of law and order stopped them to check a thing or two. So people were still fearful, people were still defiant in relation to the forces of law and order. Question, very well. As far as you know, was there any other march or marches of the RHDP or any other groups in which armed persons were infiltrated or disguised?
La marche.
Answer. Apart from the march of the 16th, which extended somewhat into the 17th, I have no recollection of any or of seeing any other march during the crisis. I don't have any such recollection. Question, very well. Mr. President, I am now going to broach a much longer topic.
16. We will resume at 15 hours at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we will have a 2-hour session this afternoon. The hearing is adjourned. Thank you.
All rise.